anarcho-syndicalist commune. We take it in turns to act as a sort of executive officer for the week.
Yes.
But all the decisions of that officer have to be ratified at a special bi-weekly meeting.
Yes, I see.
By a simple majority in the case of purely internal affairs.
Be quiet.
But by a two-thirds majority in the case of
Be
more
quiet. I order you to be quiet. Look, you stupid bastard, you've got no arms left. Yes, I have. Look. Just a flesh wound.
I don't believe I've seen such a display of courage, skill, nerve, grace, stupidity.
I'll do you for that. Oh, what? Come here. What are you going to do, bleed on me? I'm invincible!
You're a loony.
The Black Knight always triumphs!
Welcome one, welcome all, and it is that time for Roundtable Live here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. Be rolling on till 4 a.m. in the morning Eastern Time. New ideas, different hosts every night, different subjects every night. You never know what's going to happen right here at the Roundtable Live. King Arthur has nothing on us. We're going round and round.
Welcome to the Wild at Heart Roundtable Show. This is Noreen Helpan, and I'm broadcasting to you live from Southern California, where it is 9 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time or Standard Time. And that would be here on the West Coast and on the schedule for the East Coast. Since the server for this station is located on the East Coast or East Coast time, this show is on at 12 midnight Tuesday. I would say that, okay? So this is a venue called Revolution Radio as you're tuning into us on whatever means you're doing so. And we are a listener support station. So donate money. It's easy to do. You can become a Patreon. And you can also buy things from the Zazzle store. That's fun. Excuse me. You can also mail, You can also mail a check or money order made out to Revolution Radio and mail it to staff member, we call her Lady Horse, but it's Terry Ackerman, and her address is on the bottom of the site support page. So the page is fun. You can join a chat room. It's a blast. It's fun. And Happy New Year 2022. It is a Chinese New Year of the Water Tiger. So we're in an even-numbered energy. Because Tiger energy is even-numbered years, and we are also in an even-numbered universal year for the world of 6. Last year it was 5, so now we're into 6. And there's so much exciting things going on right now. As you know, there's always a lot of very amazing changes that have been ongoing for months and months and years, right? So nothing new with that per se. And I think we all know what that's about, right? Because, my God, have we been talking about it quite a bit? I just hope that 2022, and I think you guys are all thinking the same thing I am, pretty much, because it's been kind of weird, right, in the last year or two, let's face it. So, I don't know, given all that has transpired, that we just have to kind of go with the flow, right? That's kind of what it's about. But I'm hoping this year we can do more than just that, right? That we can actually take action for our lives. That's like the ideal. You don't want to just sit around and go, oh my God, what do I do? Although that's normal to kind of I don't know, to turn to that. That's kind of a normal thing, right? But, we don't really want to do that. We really want to focus on making headway. I think that will be true for 2022. Despite all the crazy, bizarre COVID stuff, and, we always talk about that, and we probably will tonight again. It's okay. It's fine. But I'm just saying that's what we transitioned from, and it is still ongoing even now, right? What's been going on with COVID and other world events. So, and also astrological events, which, I talk about it on my show as well because, I guess I'm kind of an astrologer, and I discuss planetary aspects with you guys, the listeners, often. So even though my show is not an astrology show, but I do bring it up quite a bit. And we've been going through a whole plethora of aspects the last few years, and this coming year is no exception. So I have my friend Nick on with me tonight, as he is many times with me on this show. And then I also have someone who's been a guest on my show before, and he's an astrologer, a practicing professional astrologer, and he's also an observer of the trends in our world. And he has a YouTube channel and a Rumble channel, and he can discuss all of that and share that with you. I'd like to introduce Robert Phoenix again to the show. How are you?
I'm great, Noreen. Thanks for having me back on. Appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure to have you on. Actually, I think technically this is the third time you've been on, because one time you called in to discuss, your Hill Country event that you have annually. So that was the last time you were on here, and that was really cool.
Yeah, I sort of what do they call it? I micro bombed your show.
That's fine. That was awesome. Yeah. So anyway, Robert, since I did a pretty good introduction of what you do, you can just take it from there and just share with the listeners, what you feel, even things that have transpired, up till now. What are the trends for 2022 that you see, both astrologically and just in your own observation, which is really interesting always. So you can just take it from there.
Okay, well, first of all, I want to say hi to Nick, if Nick is there.
It takes him a minute to put on his headphones, but he should be there.
Okay, I just wanted to say hello and acknowledge Nick. Well, let's see, where do we start? I think we're in a very interesting and soon to be rather difficult place. And I think we're about ready to go into another shutdown, another lockdown. I think it's coming, and I think it's going to be a planetary lockdown. I think some states may have a better go at it than other states. I mean, I think Florida and Texas, maybe Oklahoma, Idaho, Montana, South Dakota. I think some of these states will still be mostly unscathed, although, within the state of Texas where I live, there were very fierce liberal pockets who will demand certain things that take place as a part of a lockdown. And the governor here, Greg Abbott, who is a Scorpio, and he's running for governor again this year. And with the South Node in Scorpio, this is a really bad time for him to run for governor. So I think he's in a very precarious position. We'll talk about the nodes. So it'll be a big part of our conversation. But he's in a really precarious position because the last time a lockdown happened, people were furious at him. And he didn't talk to anybody. He locked out all the Republican lawmakers. He supposedly is a Republican governor, and he would not talk to any of them here in the state. And I wouldn't say I'm friends with one of them, but I know him well enough to have a conversation with him. And he basically said, Abbott wasn't talking to any of us, period, end of story. And that was a year where, back in 2020, we have legislation here every 2 years. So in 2020, there was no legislation happening. In 2021, the legislature met, so Abbott had to kind of back off a little bit from what was happening. But in 2022, the legislation will not meet. So he could easily lock the state down again and not have to deal with these people at the Capitol on a frequent basis. So I do think we're going to go into a much bigger lockdown phase and cycle, and we're probably just days away from it. And there's a lot of strange indicators or things that are happening out there that are a little troubling. So, for instance, now this is not the case in Austin because I did a quick check, but there are a number of cities around the country where the theaters, which have been showing films over the past year, almost all of those theaters are only showing one movie, and all the rest of their theaters inside of the main theater, but they have like 4 theaters inside of their main theater. Those 3, those 4, those 5, those 6, whatever the multiplex is, most of them are shut down, and they're saying rent it out for private use or something like that. The only movie that seems to be in distribution is this movie called The 355, which is a movie that's based. Of course, it's all they're not superheroes, but they're women who, of course, have great talents. And they're all spies, and they're all going to save the world. And they're named The 355 based on a woman who was supposedly a spy during the Revolutionary War. And she had a code name, and her code name was 355. So this has Salma Hayek, and it's basically a rainbow coalition of super spy women. So this movie is the only thing that's playing at movie theaters around the country after like the 5th or 6th of January, which is very odd. Like, why is this happening? The other thing that's very unusual is that BlackBerry has pretty much announced that they're through. Their BlackBerry operating system, the one that was so hard to crack, that if you were going to do anything covert, you would have a BlackBerry. You couldn't crack their operating system. BlackBerry has announced that I think as of the 4th or 5th, they're no longer going to support that operating system. So you can have a BlackBerry that has an Android OS and it'll be fine, but the original BlackBerry, which I have one, by the way, it was going to be one of my burner phones. Well, I guess I'm not going to use that. Well, they're not going to be able to use that anymore. I'm not going to be able to use it. So what's going on here, right? The United States government went to Verizon, went to who else? AT&T. The United States government, I think it was Buttigieg, went to them and said, we'd like to hold off on flipping 5G on because we have some concerns about it. And the phone companies said, well, no, that's not going to happen. We can't do that. We have to move ahead of schedule. Since when do the phone companies, when do the telecoms tell the United States government what to do? Now, if the United States government wanted to, they could shut it down. So one of the things that it's really doing is it's kind of a CYA moment, right? They're just having this CYA moment. And the telecoms are saying, well, no, we're going to, we're going to make this go live. And I think it's happening on the 6th of January. So now we have 5G going live. We have just one film being shown in multiple multiplexes around the country, with all the rest of those cinemas inside the multiplexes shut down. We have BlackBerry being shut down. So I think this all points to a lockdown. Now, from my personal experience, I either know or have heard of more people that have come down or are coming down with COVID-like symptoms than any other time since this whole charade began. And my feeling around this is that what we're dealing with now are super shedders. And a lot of the people who had 2 jabs are onto their booster. So, the commonly held thought that the media likes to portray is that those first two shots, well, they're just not working anymore. They're not quite up to speed to catch up to Omicron or any of these other variants that are coming. And, well, let's just give you a booster. Well, in actuality, if you've got the real deal versus the salt shot, they're working probably just fine in terms of what they were intended to do, which was not protect you against a virus. So they're still there. They're still doing what they're doing. And now you have this booster, which is a force multiplier. And some people might even be going to number 4. I know 3 is pretty ubiquitous. And I'm seeing all kinds of people get very sick. And these are people that have not been vaccinated. And I believe that they're in contact with the super shedders. Now, what's going to happen when the super shedders are activated at another level with 5G? And this is a real concern. And we could have the beginnings of something very drastic, like what we've seen in terms of the COVID theater, and I'll use the name theater particularly for a specific time period, and that was in 2020. And there was a dare there at the end of 2019. I got really sick, and I was in California, and there were a number of people in California who were sick at the same time, and California basically said, "Oh yeah, we had COVID here in November." So whatever I had was whatever was in the air or however I got it. And I rarely get sick, but I definitely, for about 2 weeks, I was pretty sick. But what we saw was this theater, right? And so in astrology, to kind of, bring this into the discussion, there's this planet called Neptune. And Neptune has been in Pisces since 3/11 in 2011. Neptune moved into Pisces right when Fukushima happened. We had 2 major planetary changes. Uranus went from Pisces to Aries, and Neptune went from Aquarius to Pisces, and it was all within a span of about 3 weeks, right there with Fukushima. So Neptune, one of the things that Neptune, in its own sign in Pisces, is associated with is a sense of kind of mass delusion, right? There's a sense that you can't really understand the nature of reality. Everything becomes very fluid, and there's a lot of projection. Sometimes there can be a heightened sense of spiritual exuberance with Neptune and Pisces. Sometimes you can get a very deep and sort of depraved version of Neptune and Pisces, where we get to see things that we'd rather not see, or things that are hidden or occulted from us, which is very much related to the 12th house, the ruler of both Neptune and Pisces. So we begin to see things like the adrenochrome drama, things with kids, things with kids that are purported to be real, trafficking, which I do believe is real, by the way. And then you get to see the stuff with kids that's very real, like, Desmond, the 9-year-old, trans dancer. I mean, that's a very Neptune and Pisces kind of thing. Like, that doesn't normally happen. So we've been witnessing this theater where everything is kind of getting rolled out simultaneously. It's like the Pandora's box meets the Weimar Republic meets Blade Runner, right? I mean, this is what Neptune and Pisces has brought us. In astrology, they have these things called decans, and they're connected to the first 10 degrees, second 10 degrees, and third 10 degrees of each sign. Each sign has 30 degrees associated with it. So when Neptune went into Pisces, it was in the first decan, which was the Piscean decan. And we could go back and look at that time. And what was really big during that time was the immigration crisis. Like, it was just happening. and this is one of the things that I talked about very early on, is that people would be convinced that taking the immigrants was a very quote-unquote humane and even Christian thing to do. Because when we think of Pisces, we think of the Piscean age, and we think of the Abrahamic religions in a lot of ways. So we look at places like Sweden and Germany and countries in the Western Christian tradition. They're taking these people in because, well, they believe it's the right thing to do, and it's the humane thing to do, and somewhere deep down inside it's the Christian thing to do. And when we saw this happening, it was happening on water. These boats were crossing, from North Africa into Southern Europe and other places. So it's a very Neptunian and Piscean thing. It's happening, right? It's first decans. And there was this one boat that was really popular doing this. It made, probably hundreds of runs. It was called the Aquarius. And I thought, well, that's really interesting, right? This boat has this name. It's like a big orange, big orange pontoony boat. And I think it's out of commission now, but that was a boat you'd always see. And it was like, well, why is that? Well, first of all, Aquarius is the wave bringer, the message bringer, the water bearer. And, and it's literally washing these people, mostly men, onto the shores of these countries, right? So that's like first decan, Neptune and Pisces. And then we went through the second decan when it was between 10 and 20 degrees. And during that period, we went through a lot of the Obama period. We also went through this time when Trump was elected. And Cancer is a sign that's very traditional, and it likes to hang on to things like home and family and hearth and security. So there's no. It's understandable that somebody like Trump would be elected during that time, because that was kind of floating around the noosphere, right? That's what was going on. That's what was happening astrologically. And you also saw these nationalist movements, like Brexit happened during second decan, Neptune and Pisces. And then you had some other candidates, Marine Le Pen and a few other candidates in Western Europe who were, quote unquote national. So this nationalism sort of began to rise during the second decan in Pisces. And then eventually that ends. And it kind of really ends when just as Trump is leaving office. So right now, Neptune is at 21 degrees Pisces, which puts it in the third decan, and that's the Scorpio decan. And when we deal with Scorpio, we deal with things like death, and we deal with the underworld, and we deal with drug addiction, the malfeasance, and the malediction of drugs. We deal with things like lurid images of sexuality, grotesquerie, raw, naked power plays that are also occulted in some kind of subterfuge. So we're in a very interesting phase here with Neptune and Pisces, and it really feels like we're moving into very deep and very dark waters, and we're going to have an interesting year for a number of different reasons astrologically. Jupiter is going to move into conjunction with Pisces this year, and that's a very rare occurrence. Like the last time that Jupiter wound up in conjunction with Neptune was in the year 1856. And some very interesting things happened during that year. Number one, there was something called melaphaline. Here, I have it on my computer. It basically was a byproduct of people trying to synthesize. It's called Malvine, and somebody by the name of William Henry Perkin was trying to synthesize quinine. It's interesting. Quinine is something that has been fairly effective in treating malaria, and when we look at COVID-19, there seems to be some kind of connection with this malarial strain. Well, why would we say that? Well, if you go to Africa, Africa takes, guess what, hydroxychloroquine, and they take ivermectin. Why? Because they're antiparasitic and antibacterials. And there's not a huge outbreak of theoretical COVID in Africa, whatever they said happened in South Africa aside, right? So it's kind of interesting that quinine is trying to be synthesized during that period of time, but it's also generally considered to be the birth of what they call the chemical industry. So that's when Jupiter was conjuncting Neptune in 1856. And then in May 14th of 1856, this is very interesting factoid, the San Francisco Committee of Vigilance is founded in the United States. It lynches 2 gangsters, arrests most Democratic Party officials, and disbands itself on August 18th. So what you have there is you have this rise of vigilantism and people who are obviously pissed off. Now, I have no backstory as to why they did this. It was just something I ran across. But I think it's quite interesting because that's kind of a theme of our time right now. I mean, it's not the Whig Party. It's not the Federalist Party. It's not the Republican Party. It's the Democratic Party officials. So when Jupiter and Neptune form this conjunction, it has this potential to really expand things in ways that are, what's the word I'm looking for? Almost unbelievable, right? And this is 1856, where they didn't have the technology. Well, they had it before 1856. If you want to go down the Tartarian rabbit hole, I mean, all that stuff was there, and they managed to kind of reinvent it for the Second Industrial Revolution, albeit at a much more, how do I say this, industrial level, right? But, you know, they didn't have the technology that we have now. Now we've got this crazy technology. We've got this Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, and we're dealing with a society that's been essentially in a mind control experiment for the last 2 years. I mean, this is like the Stanford prison experiment on steroids. And people reach a breaking point. And we're getting very close to that breaking point. And if we get thrown into another lockdown, and we go into this period with this Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, which I believe happens in March, April, then I'll get you the specific dates on that. Then it sets the stage for, you know, we keep talking about like mass formation hypnosis, mass formation psychosis. You haven't seen anything yet. Like,
my goodness, that's hard. I mean, I believe you, but you think like we've been observing this high strangeness with people with this hypnotic kind of like not thinking in their own mind reactionary stuff, right? And then you're basically saying it's going to accelerate. Wow.
It will accelerate. And the reason it will accelerate is, well, there's an astrological component to this. And I feel like the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction is an amplifier. You know, it amplifies emotion. It amplifies, to some degree, spirituality, whatever you know you want to determine spirituality to be. There can be messianism with a Neptune and Pisces and Jupiter-Neptune conjunction. There could be a sense of messianism. But there could also be kind of an end times kind of hysteria as well.
Robert, let me explain to the audience. I mean, I'll just do it real quickly. What Robert's saying for people that are not as, knowledgeable about astrology is because Neptune, as he was saying earlier, is a generational planet that has kind of a long transit. It stays in a sign for a fairly long time. And Pisces is, Neptune rules Pisces. So That's like a high illusion already. You have the planet Jupiter, which, yeah, that's a good love planet, but it also, like he was saying, expands things. So when you combine, which is ironic because Jupiter also used to rule Pisces, which is now Neptune is in Pisces. So that's kind of like a, ironic thing already. But then you have the amplification he was talking about with Jupiter amplifying these traits of being deceived and everything with Neptune and Pisces. So this is, now I see what you mean, how this can really be interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
So the conjunction of Jupiter and Neptune will take place on April 1st, April Fool's Day. So that's a very interesting day for that conjunction to be exact. Just in terms of what it represents and the potential for anything. I mean, at this point in time, we've been tripwired so hard right now that there are any number of events that could take place, both real and fabricated. And, we're in a place now where we can kind of expect that. Like most people kind of expect that. Like, okay, if you're really paying attention and looking around, it's like, well, what else is going to happen next? What else are they going to, roll out of their little, bag of magic tricks? And we can speculate quite a bit if we want to. We can speculate some kind of staged alien event, which, might occur. We could speculate that there would be another plague that could be introduced into the public. And this one might be very different than what we're experiencing. And it could be, like, very real. Like, for me, when COVID first came around, it was mostly theater. And they got people to buy into the theater. And what they really wanted them to do was to get vaccinated. Because once they were vaccinated, then the transference of what was going on inside of them could take place amongst other people. Now they had a real plague on their hands. And, we're also dealing with this bizarre, reality of hospitals becoming almost like death camps and processing centers. And again, that's very much Neptune and Pisces. Neptune and Pisces and the 12th house rule things like hospitals. So just in my own life, I can tell you that a month and a half ago, I had a cousin who was in her, late 40s, early 50s, and she went to a hospital, and guess what? She died. She was overweight, and she wasn't really healthy. But I don't think they put a lot of time and effort into making sure she got out of that hospital. Like, she was in a coma, they brought her out of a coma, and then they put her back into a coma, and then she was gone. And now, her mother, my aunt, went into a hospital about a week ago for some kind of procedure with her hip. Found out that she had a broken bone, and now they've got her in a medically induced coma and on life support.
Are you kidding? This is awful.
No. So this is, and by the way, these are not isolated cases. So the
This is happening. I know this. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The hospitals have become killing fields. And this is very much akin to, again, Neptune and Pisces. Now, I said we were going to talk about the nodes, and I'll try to, give people a general understanding of what they are and why they're important. So the moon, and we're going to play luminary space game for just a minute here, okay? So the moon has an ascending and descending plane with the Earth. And the ascending plane of the moon is called the North Node. And the descending plane of the moon is called the South Node. Now, in Indian astrology, they have something very similar They call it Rahu and Ketu, which play a very important role in Indian astrology. So in the West, we call them the North Node and the South Node. They're also known as the Dragon's Head and the Dragon's Tail. So this month, on the 18th, well, the North Node is getting ready to move into Taurus. In fact, let me just give you the North Node calculation for that really quickly here, because I think it's important in terms of our conversation. So the North Node is already in Taurus. It's at 29 degrees Taurus. So the True Node, which is a variable calculation of the North Node, it will move into Taurus, 29 Taurus, on the 19th. But in terms of the North Node, we're there. So I want to talk about the nodes just for a few minutes. The nodes are really important because the North Node is an indicator of where things are headed culturally. Excuse me. Where things are headed culturally. The South Node is an indicator of where things are in decline or in a state of entropy or atrophy culturally. So if we go back and we look at essentially from April of 2020 until December of 2021, the nodes were in the sign of Gemini and Sagittarius. So the North Node was in Gemini, the South Node was in Sagittarius. And what did we see when the North Node was in Gemini? We saw things like, George Floyd and the whole George Floyd event take place in Minneapolis, the Twin Cities. And that's where Prince was from. And Prince was a Gemini. And what was the name of his group? His group was the Revolution. And what was Prince's nickname? The Purple One. And what did we see after George Floyd? We saw the world bathed in purple. The United States was now being, there was a coup in the United States, and it was under the guise of the Purple Revolution. It was a color revolution. And we began to see all of this twin energy, all of this Gemini energy, even with Joe Biden having like multiple versions of Biden. Well, that's not Biden. That's not Biden. You had multiple versions of the White House. Oh, that's not the White House. That's in Southern California. No, that's Tyler Perry's movie set in Atlanta. So we got moved into this Hall of Mirrors world with Gemini, where you couldn't really get a sense as to who was real or what was real, but we would always see these bizarre kinds of doppelgangers and pairs of things. And then the South Node was in Sagittarius, which represents law and philosophy and religion. And what went out the window during that period of time? Law? What law? The country became lawless, of course, unless you wanted to take the law into your own hands, in which case the Gemini effect would kick in, and there would be a law for one group and a law for another group, which we clearly saw. So there was a great deal of lawlessness that took place with the South Node in Sagittarius. There was also, again, in this country in particular, a border crisis. And we saw that both during the Trump administration, although it quelled for a while, and then it came back 100-fold in the Biden administration. So when we get into Sagittarius, we start to think about things like foreign countries, philosophy, law, religion, again, immigrants. So we've set a pattern here with these nodes. And the nodes are shifting now, and the True Node is moving into Taurus, which is a very different energy than Gemini. And Taurus is a fixed sign. So in astrology, you have mutable and fixed and cardinal. And Gemini is a mutable sign, which means there's a lot of adaptability. There's a lot of ability to pivot. During the time where the True Node in Gemini, we saw mass migration in this country. People were fleeing cities. People were buying properties in Florida and Texas and Idaho, right? That's all the True Node in Gemini. So that's coming to an end now. And Taurus is grounded, it's earthy, it's fixed. So when we think of fix, what do we think of? People not moving. And we're just now getting into these first degrees of the true node. And those first degrees, especially the 28th and 27th degree of any sign, are very erratic. They're very erratic degrees. So the energy is hard to deal with. But in a fixed sign with, perhaps this imminent lockdown that I believe is coming, that in those degrees, you'll have the lockdown, you'll have the fixity, but people are not going to be happy. They're just not going to be happy. It's going to be very, very difficult. And I think they're getting prepared for the difficult nature of where this is going to go. And then the south node, which again represents the sort of the world in decline or the world in a place of entropy, that's going to be in Scorpio. And again, it's a fixed sign, but what we're going to see in Scorpio is something unlike we've seen in quite a long time. We had a bit of a hint of it when Saturn moved into Scorpio, and we began to sort of pull the covers back on people like Jerry Sandusky and Jimmy Savile and what went down at Penn State. Like that was a very Saturn and Scorpio sort of moment, which ultimately kind of leads into later on with the whole Pizzagate thing. But now we're going to see this other side of Scorpio revealed, and it's going to be hard for people to deal with. And one of the things that Scorpio is connected to is death. And I think we are about to see some massive deaths kick in. And the deaths that will be attributed, like even now, their insurance companies are seeing an incredible rise of deaths in people between the age of 18 and 65. I think it's like a 40% increase in that age.
Wow.
I mean,
well, I'm not shocked, but that's a lot.
It is. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. And I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. So they were using everything in their power to create a theater of death early on in COVID. Anybody that died of something, even if it wasn't COVID related, was marked a COVID related death. And most everybody listening to this program is aware of that. I'm not, bringing any revelation from high on the mountain. But that's what they used in order to create this sense of impending death and doom and fear. But after that, it really wasn't about the deaths. It was about infectious cases. Because they had already set the stage that if you got infected, you would die. They didn't need the deaths after that point. Again, this is all Neptune and Pisces stuff. Because they had created the tableau for that to happen. So now people were like, well, we just have these numbers, and the numbers indicate that if this continues to go in this direction, then these numbers will translate into deaths. Like they created that algorithm in people's heads. And then what they also did is they put people through a major state of trauma. And if you look at where we started at the beginning of 2020, COVID really kicks in on guess what day? 3/11. That's when the NBA cancels its season. And then I believe it was on the 3/13, Trump declares an emergency. And it's a big declaration, shuts the country down. Kicks in, the beginning of all the payouts. Huge transfer of wealth, massive. So that happens. And then just as people are looking around saying, you guys said it was for 2 weeks. We're kind of over this thing. We're over like spending time with our kids and our family and day drinking while we work at home. So, we're going to hit the streets. And people were driving around their cars. Hello, True Node and Gemini. You're driving around your car and you're honking your horn. And you're driving by Sacramento and you're honking your horn at the Capitol and Gavin Newsom. And then what happens? George Floyd happens. And then we watch America burn. We watch our statues get torn down. We watch the impotence of Donald Trump on full display. Nobody's doing anything. The police are taking a knee. I mean, that's traumatic. That's traumatic stuff. So that we get thrown into this pandemic, we get thrown into this chaos, we kind of come out of the chaos, and then we're thrust into the election with the pandemic in the background. Of course, Trump theoretically coming down with COVID. That was in October of 2020. And then we have the vote. We have Stop the Steal. We have 3 protests in Washington, D.C., the third resulting in January 6th. So we have been through, and that's not to mention businesses being shut down, businesses being closed for a period of time, people having to lay people off, people not being able to get those people back. Then Operation Warp Speed kicks in. Then we have to deal with the vaccine. That bifurcates everybody. That's more Trudeau and Gemini.
And then also the endless spending, right?
Endless spending.
Yeah.
The endless spending is part of it, but that's not what people are thinking about.
True.
Like, people are thinking about their survival. Like when the whole COVID thing happened, what was the first thing that people tried to do but couldn't get done?
Oh, is that a question?
I'll tell you what it is. It's not
Okay.
that hard. It's buy toilet paper.
That's right. Okay.
So what do you do with toilet paper? You wipe your ass. And what is your ass connected to? It's your first chakra.
Oh, that's right.
So if you can't find toilet paper and wipe your ass, what do you do? No, seriously, this is an important question.
Yeah, you do.
Because the first so bring this back to astrology. Like when we're born, we come into our lives, we come into our charts, we come into the first house, which is Aries, which is pure will manifest, right? So when we're little babies, we piss, we shit, we cry, we laugh, we do all those things, and it just happens, right? There's no governor. But at some point, we get toilet trained. And then what happens? Well, that's when we move into the second house with Taurus. Because now we have to be aware of our bowel movements, and we have to clinch, and we have to take care of ourselves. It's a very first chakra, very fundamental lesson. So when we couldn't get toilet paper, what did it do? It took people all the way back to their infancy, where now they could be in a position where they couldn't, wipe their butt, and their mommy couldn't wipe their butt for them. That was absolutely psychological. That was a total Edward Bernays moment, and they knew exactly what they were doing. They were putting people into a state of infantilism, and everything after that was all about continued trauma, so that people would revert back to their childhood, where most people experience their traumas. And now what do? Well, you look for an adult to solve your issue, your problem. Can you please take care of this? This person's being...
Right. Please, the government, you guys know everything.
That's right.
Fauci and all these COVID experts, they're your dads, your uncles, your moms. They know everything.
That's right. Absolutely. So, here we are now. We're 2 years into this thing, and people are primed. Like, they are really, really primed to kind of go over the edge. They're primed for any number of other things too, from the application of multiple doses of an mRNA technology, which more than likely has graphene oxide and probably nanoparticulates in it. I mean, the nanoparticulate thing, and you and I have talked about this, Noreen. This goes into Morgellons world. And people that have been dealing with Morgellons have been dealing with this mess since the early 2000s. Well, guess what? Now they just decided to, spread the love around a little bit.
Oh, man. Oh.
So this is where we are now. Now, that said, it sounds a little doomy, but that said, we're in a place where this is it. I mean, 2022 is where the rubber is really going to hit the road. And I do feel that there are going to be things that are going to happen in 2022 that will be favorable for people that have some courage, okay? Because you talk a little about the year of the tiger. And, this is a year that favors the bold. right? This is a year where Mars comes back to the night sky. So in October of 2021, I think it was October 15th or 16th, Mars went behind the sun. So we haven't really seen Mars since October, and we won't really see Mars again until late March. And when it arrives, it will arrive in the sign of Aries, which is a very interesting sign. It's a sign that's connected to masculinity and determination and willpower. And that's going to be a very interesting move because Mars arrives again. The idea of it coming down from behind the sun and being visible is very, very significant. So that's going to be a very interesting time with the arrival of Mars. And the time between now and then is going to be, I think, tricky. We're in a very tricky time. And we haven't even gotten into the Pluto return for the United States, which happens on 2/22/22/2/23/22. And that's a really, really big moment. That's where Pluto was in the United States chart in 1776. And it hasn't come back around again since then. And there are a lot of ramifications for that, mostly financial, and some of which has to do with leadership as well. That was really the time when people said enough was enough. Like, we're going to have this document. Not everybody was behind the document, but we're going to have this document, and this document is going to enumerate, what we're here to do. So we're coming up on that moment again. We're coming to a 1776 moment. And are we coming up on a break here? Is it going to happen soon?
Oh, yeah, that's going to be in about 6 minutes or so. I'll let you know.
Because maybe I could squeeze this story in before the break. And so this happened tonight. And I've been, involved in sort of local politics. I ran for the city council last year. It was a very interesting experience. But I do my best to support our fellow freedom and truth-loving people here in the hill country of Texas, primarily Fredericksburg, Texas. And the city council, and along with the city manager, have decided that they're going to accept this money called the American Rescue Plan. And so this is money that the Biden administration is doling out to thousands of small towns and cities across America, mostly for about $2.5 million. And you could use it for any number of things, but there are strings attached to it. And you get the federal government getting its hooks into this is how they're going to get to these cities in rural America and middle America, in these red states. They're going to take this money, and once they take this money, the federal government will say, look, you took that money, you didn't read the fine print. We've got mandates, we've got all sorts of things that we can enforce upon your city because you signed that contract. And they will do it, right? So we are aware of it. We got a hold of it. We got a hold of the American Rescue Plan document. We got a hold of the fact that our city manager signed it, that there was money already in the account, and there was no public discourse around this. And we have been hitting with this for the last 2 months. And of course, they're just, doing their best to ignore us. We caught them in a huge lie. The city manager essentially said, well, it's just like any other grant money from the government. No, it's not. The city lawyer had to correct him 3 times during that meeting after he said that. And talk about malfeasance. Well, then he put it off on, well, the Texas Municipal League. That's what they said. Well, the Texas Municipal League basically had to take back and omit something as one of their talking points that they give out to all these city managers, because really what they are is just an appendage of Agenda 21 and the Smart Cities program. So that's what they're there to do. They're to indoctrinate people. So once that happened, we forced the city manager and we forced the newspaper to have a retraction publicly. They couldn't just sweep it under the carpet. Well, tonight, my good friend Jeanette Hormuth and 130 other citizens here in Fredericksburg and the surrounding area served the city council, the mayor, and the city manager with affidavits. These are very powerful notarized documents putting them on notice that they have to respond to every single one of those points. Every single one of those points, and they've got 72 hours to do it. And if they default on responding to them, there are serious consequences, including financial penalty to each one of those city council members and the city manager. So we brought in 6 boxes of these things to the city council meeting. You should have seen the looks on their faces.
Tom,
Now,
that was classic.
now this is a 1776 moment right here.
Yeah.
This is where we are.
Well, it couldn't just be Fredericksburg. I'm guessing maybe other towns and cities across this country have some awareness of this and are looking into it, you think? Or
Absolutely. Well, you can see it on the school board level with the mama bears coming out. You can see it in any number of city council meetings. I believe, I think it was Orville. They basically told Gavin Newsom to pound sand.
okay, there's the music break. This is Noreen Helpman, her show. We'll be right back after the break. Stay tuned.
Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
Hey everyone, it's Barbara Jean Lindsay, the Cosmic Oracle. If you have questions about your past lives or future plans, need answers from the cosmos about your love life or career, or just want to keep your finger on the pulse of the planet, check out my show, The Cosmic Oracle, here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
Transcending time and space, let us take you to the place inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Galactic Interstellar Council on Revolution Radio Studio A, Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Join us as we traverse the starseed paradigm, as expressed in the time-space continuum that we know as the divine expression of love and light. Integrating this conscious unity into the galactic paradigm. So welcome all, both terrestrial beings and galactic beings as one. So be it. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
If you think for 1 second that the Capitol will ever treat us fairly, you are lying to yourselves. Because we know who they are and what they do. This is what they do, and we must fight back. You can torture us and
yet, I hope. We've tried and we've tried for years and years to use passive resistance and loud voices to make a change. The time is over. Your governments around the world have no other goal than to decimate your entire existence at the hands of the bankers and the elites. The war is coming, and it's your choice to decide if you want to be a warrior or a victim. Denial is not a choice anymore. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the planet. Not giving up. Revolution Radio.
Welcome back to Noreen Helpand's Wild at Heart Roundtable Show. And I'm with my guest, Robert Phoenix, and my friend Nick. And I want to give a shout out to my friend Bob. He lives around here. He has his family here, near me, here in Orange County. But he is originally from Texas and goes there often. And he was just saying how impressed he was, Robert, with what you have to say, because he's very civically minded as well and aware of everything that we've more or less been discussing. So, you know, you're like a fellow Texan, right? He's a Cali, I call him a Cali Texan, but whatever. Anyway, yeah, he's very impressed. So shout out to you, Bob. Robert, continue about that interesting situation with your local, town hall, city hall board meeting thing that you guys were doing.
Yeah, I mean, it really felt historic in a lot of ways. It was we were all standing in the foyer of the meeting room, the meeting hall, which is adjacent to the police center. And we're all standing there after we did it. They had a closed session after that, and there was this kind of giddy excitement in the air that we had generated this grassroots effort. And by the way, I went to one of the signings of the affidavit. All of them are notarized, and I went to one of the signings, and it felt like I was at the beginning of something. And it was at a restaurant here in town, run by a pretty well-known and fairly wealthy family who have very similar interests that we do. And the restaurant was closed that night, so we met there, and it was open to people to read the documents and then go over them and then sign them. And we had two notaries there that were notarizing them. And I walked into the room, and I was really surprised at how many people were there. And a lot of people I hadn't seen, because our little core group is maybe about 20, 25 people strong that I would say, okay, here's this person, this person, this person. But there were a number of people in that room that I had never met before, which was really, really good. And there was one interesting conversation that took place, and it had to do with this penalty, this $24,000 penalty that was tacked on to each city council member and mayor and the city manager. Frankly, I thought it was too low. But there was one fellow who went over the documents, and he thought they were really good. He had a pretty good legal mind, but he had an issue with the amount. He felt like, well, it feels like we're being punitive and we're punishing them, and maybe what we really need to do is try to, we'll like the document, but let's try and reason with them. And he kept bringing this up during the meeting. And then somebody chimed in, another guy chimed in, and he essentially said, look, I've looked at a number of these affidavits, and that's actually a really low figure based on what they're doing in terms of violating. And there are violations. There's Texas constitutional violations. There's United States constitutional violations. And they're all enumerated in this document. And he said, based on, what they're doing, that's actually fairly low. And what happened was that they worked it out. This guy worked it out. And he said, I'm going to sign it. I'd rather not have that language in there about the money, but I'm going to override it because I think this is important. I'm going to put my personal opinion or feeling aside because I think there's something bigger here. And I thought that was a really interesting interaction. And to bring it back into astrology, on the 21st of December in 2020, we had a super conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius. And this is a really, really important astral moment in time. Now, prior to that, we had Saturn in Aquarius. It had already been there. And that's when the lockdowns happened, was when Saturn went into Aquarius. And we experienced this thing at a global level, which is very Aquarian. And we were all sort of beholden by the same law, which was very Saturnian. And that was a hard time. That was like hard Saturn, dark Aquarius, the whole fourth industrial revolution, the Great Reset, and the world that Klaus Schwab and the technocrats want to install is the dark version of Aquarius. It's like the Saturnian version of Aquarius, because Aquarius used to be ruled by Saturn. And then once Uranus was discovered, it's like, hey, here's a planet. Let's throw Aquarius over there. It needs a sign. It actually fits really well with Uranus. But they want to have the Saturnian version of Aquarius, which is very dark. It's the black sun. And it represents an age of technology, and an age of technology that has access, but it's also an age where it is highly centralized. Right? There are people that control how much power you can use, because perhaps your use of power creates more emissions, carbon emissions in the environment. We don't want that, right? So there's a high degree of centralized control, even though it's a decentralized technocratic system. Now, with Jupiter in Aquarius, the wild card came into play, and it's like, okay, well, what if we have a different system or competing system than the one that they're laying out here, giving us kind of a heads up? Like, they're giving us a heads up. They're giving us a head start of looking at what they want to do. Well, thanks for doing that, because now we get to think about, well, maybe we don't want that. And what's our version of this? And that's very much sort of this Jupiter and Aquarius model, although the two interact with one another. One expands and one contracts. So when you get expansion and contraction, what do you get? You get birth. So we're in this birth phase. We're in this birth cycle. And when I witnessed that event in that restaurant, it gave me a lot of hope, because for one, nobody's organizing this. Like, this is a friend of mine who is an ex-Californian, who is a waitress in town. And she is absolutely devoted to this cause. But she would not call herself a leader by any stretch. And, different people do different things, and they all sort of chip in and chime in. And it's really a very interesting thing to see. And what was really cool about that moment in the restaurant is that a lot of times, people on the right, or people that are patriotic, or people that are quote unquote truthers or independent, they're really good at being individuals. They're very good at being individuals. They're not very good at being on a team and being in a group and figuring out how to work together. Whereas the so-called left and the Democrats and the progressives, they kind of suck at being individuals. So what they do is they magnetize with one another so they can be a group and they can be a team, and they're very organized and they're very good at getting things done. And they do it because they have an idea, they have an ideal, they have a cause, and they have a party, and they're willing to subjugate, their point of view, their ego for this idea of the greater good of their party. They're very good at that, but they suck at being individuals mostly. And the individuals are really going to be individuals. Just leave us alone. Let's live our lives. We'll take care of ourselves. We're responsible. Less government. But they're not very good at banding together and bonding together. And I saw the beginnings of that in that room that night, where they could have that dialogue. And, you know, one guy wasn't going to shout the other guy down. One guy put his own individual preference aside for the group in that moment. So his signature and maybe his document would be the one that would count or matter. So this is an interesting thing that's taking place, because now we have these individuals, these organelles that are coming together, and they're stronger because they're individuals. But yet when they come together as a group, it's not because they're deficient and they've got a big open wound and they're looking for unconditional support and bonding together against the big bad machine out there. They're coming together because they realize that ultimately it's in their best interest and they're not going to be able to do it alone. And that's what's happening now. And it's happening organically. So we're seeing this Aquarian, this nascent Aquarian energy begin to form and come together. And it's very heartening in a lot of ways. And I want people to think about that for a moment, because we consume a lot of media, and most of the media is very toxic and very polarizing. And even, you know, people in the alt media and alt-right circles can be toxic and polarizing as well. Sometimes they're maybe less so, right? But the picture we get is a dark picture. And by the way, I don't think that dark picture should be discounted. But right. I would also like to say that there's something happening underneath all of this. And that something is just the beginning. It's the beginning of something major that is going to occur. And it will culminate in humanity moving to another level of existence, and one that has a lot to do with our divinity. And we're going to find during these times that when we invest in things like faith and courage and truth and freedom, real ideals, not sloganeering, but real ideals, that we will be fed by something greater than us that wants us to embrace those ideals. And you combine that with love, real love, right? The love for the people that I had in that room that night, for the love of the people that I had in the room tonight that went up there. And even in a strange way, the love that I had for the people who were sitting around the city council table, who were catalyzing the people in the room to do what they did, right? When you have that, you put it all together, then we're starting to really cook with gas. And I feel like that's ultimately where we're headed. And we're going to be tested, because nothing really important and vital happens in your life unless you work for it, I think. Every now and then you get a break, you get some grace, and it's a cool thing. But anything that I've ever done, I've had to work hard towards, and there was something good that came out of it. And I think it's a really basic and fundamental lesson. So, you know, we're in a very interesting time. The United States Pluto return is significant because it represents the end of an epoch and the end of an era for this version of the country. And I think we've kind of played that version of the country out. I mean, it's gotten incredibly corrupt, diseased, corpulent, and there are some things that are good that could be taken from that model and put on the life raft for the next version, but there's a lot that should be left behind. And
I wanted to say, like, it's very, very encouraging what you're saying, and also the fact that this, I feel, is you do, very important, and I'm sure the listeners do too, this event that happened, that you experienced tonight. It is, don't you think it falls right into the upcoming Pluto return, which is going to happen, fairly soon? And then you were also mentioning earlier about Mars entering Aries in, the spring, approximately. And then that is like looking at the revolution in a sense too, right? So maybe this upcoming year could sort of be, kind of explained in those terms. Like, this is the actual revolution that people, whether they wanted it or not, right, are going to be facing possibly in this country specifically.
I believe that. And it's the beginning of a cycle. And, when the nodes change again in 19 months, the true node will go into Aries. And that's going to be a very powerful time, because that is really indicative of power, the individual, and it's a precursor for when Saturn moves into Aries in 2025. That's going to be a big time in 2025. We're also going to have a Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and those are powerful periods when the social order dissolves. So, but this Mars reemergence, which I started really looking at in October, actually pre-October, right around, I think, August of last year, it really began to dawn on me that if you look at it in the midst of all these other events, I think it's quite important. And it's a time where people get, I don't want to use the word energized, but there's an immediacy. There's a real sense of immediacy. It's also very male energy. And I've been watching interesting things happen around men lately. And I watched Jason Whitlock, who is a former sports writer, and he has a show on Glenn Beck's network. And I love Jason. And he has been just doing some incredible work. And one of the things I really like about Jason is that he's open. And when I first started to follow him a little bit, I didn't like him at all. He was sort of I'll be honest, and he probably wouldn't mind if I said this, but he was like a black man with a chip on his shoulder. That's what Jason was like. And he went from that guy to a guy who is now openly against wokeism, openly against the gravy train and the payroll, which clearly he could have benefited from if he just spouted the party line. I mean, Jason, who's very good and very articulate and very smart, could have been very rich. I mean, very rich. If he decided that he was going to sign on the progressive dotted line, Jason would have been a made man. But he didn't do that. And he's evolving. And I'll tell you how much he's evolving. He made a reference on his show to this young black guy that I used to follow on Twitter named Chronicles of Judah 144, who's brilliant. I mean, this is a brilliant dude. And he's able to break down esoteric symbolism and sports, and he's black. And he talks about the creation of a real black culture, which has nothing to do with hip hop or any of the other like fake culture. Jason referenced him on his show, and I thought that's really interesting. And I'd heard Jason say a few things that I had heard in some of Judah's YouTube streams, and I thought, man, that sounds a lot like Chronicles of Judah. And sure enough, I mean, he'd been watching him. So this is really interesting. And one of the things that Jason has ignited is he has this thing called the Fearless Army. And he's really appealing to men and how men need to stand up and be counted. And it's not just black men, but men in general. And I think Jason is having a tremendous impact on what's happening. And we had Jordan Peterson sort of do this thing, to young men like, clean up your room, whatever. And then Robert Bly, who I thought did some tremendous work, maybe about 3 decades too early, but nonetheless tremendous work around men. And I feel like Jason is in that camp now. Like he's in that camp with Robert Bly and Jordan Peterson in his own way. And I think Jason's right there. And so I'm watching these things around me through him and with other men, and it's like they're tired. You know, they're tired of watching commercials on TV and not seeing themselves on TV. And I know it's TV and everything, but, you know, they're being phased out. They're being pushed out. And it's having, I think, a very bracing effect on men in a good way. So when Mars comes back into Aries, my sense is that we're going to see a major energetic move with men. Now, it could also be very martial because that's what Aries represents, right? We could be dealing with a very martial kind of atmosphere around late March, early April. But that's not exclusive of what I think will be happening with it. And by the way, not just men, but also women that have a fighting spirit, because it's masculine energy, which is not necessarily the sole province of men. But there's a lot of fierce women too. So that's going to be in play. And I think it's a very powerful energy. We have other things that are going on this year as well. We have the true node is going to be touching on the 26th degree of Taurus, which is connected to this fixed star called Algol. And Algol is also known as the Devil's Star. And it's connected to Medusa. And so it's in astrology, they have these 6 royal stars. They're called the Behenian stars. And Algol is one of the royal stars, which is interesting. So it has a place in the pantheon of the luminaries that is very important. So it is connected to the throat, and it's connected to things like lynchings and beheadings, decapitation. So the true node is going to be conjunct Algol on the 6th of March, and it will also be conjunct the moon on the 6th of March. So that's going to be a very interesting period of time.
Would you say that anybody who has planets or, you know, important key elements in their chart at around the 26th degree of Taurus, that'll be interesting for them personally? I have Venus in Taurus at 21 degrees. That's, you know, nowhere near exact. But I would think people who have it close to that degree and aspects too in their chart, it might be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think for you, so that could be a precursor for when the true node hits your Venus. And that could be a time where you need to articulate something about someone that you know or are in a relationship with that is important to you, right? What would happen if you didn't know how long you had left to live?
Right.
And I'm not saying that you do or don't, but what would happen if you knew that and you had an opportunity to articulate something in a way that was important, right? You would say to yourself, I would take advantage of that opportunity, and I would use this moment to articulate. I would stick my head out and risk something so that this person would know how I feel about them or what I feel about them. That's
I'm in Aries too, plus I have Mars in Pisces in the 8th house, so this might be interesting. We'll see.
Right, but that's how I would look at it because when the nodes move backwards, so that node is eventually going to hit your Venus, and that would be a time where it would be evident that whatever it was that you said or shared or articulated would have an impact on how you relate and who you relate to as it relates to that moment that you shared the thing that you did.
Right.
Yep. Also, that same day, Venus and Mars are exactly conjunct in Aquarius at 0 degrees. We have this whole period in like February, March, that basically from like the 22nd of February up through the end of March, that's going to be a wild ride. Wild ride. On the 3rd of March, Mars, Pluto, and Venus are all going to be conjunct at 27 degrees Capricorn. Like that's a major conjunction. And I've been trying to really, really wrap my head around what that's going to look like. Like how is that going to manifest? And it feels when I just try to feel into it, the feeling I get is it feels very metallic to me. It feels like what's the word I'm looking for? It feels like a sort of metallic, titanic. There's like large machinery that's just kind of moving across the land and landscape. It's what it feels. There's kind of an ominous vibe to it, right? Because Venus is about contracts, and Mars is about the implementation of action, and Pluto is about beginnings and endings. So this is something like big, really big. And when you go back and you look at the Pluto return in the United States, you'll see that on that day, the Sun and Saturn are conjunct by 1 degree in the sign of Aquarius. So this is a big time, right? There's something powerful that is in this conjunction with these two luminaries. Remember now, Saturn is dark. It is the black sun. It is conjoining with the solar logos together. That's very powerful. So Saturn's slightly ahead of the sun, so Saturn can dim the sun, right? Saturn can contract the light of the moments. And then when you look at the planets that are behind them, literally you have this whole army of Capricornian planets behind them, including Pluto, including Venus, including Mars, which is, I believe, at 3 degrees, including Mercury, which is retrograde. And it almost feels like it's staging. It's like a staging moment. It almost feels like there's assets in the background waiting to be brought in. And one of the things that I was kind of toying around with in my head was this idea of a crisis around the Pluto return, but the crisis being perhaps geological or geophysical, like maybe there's a significant earthquake or something that reflects this tectonic time in the historical canon in the United States. And one of the things that I was picking up on was, let's say, for instance, and I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but it's something that came to me, was quite strong, that we did have some kind of crisis like this. And what would happen if, say, the Chinese decided that they were going to lend a hand in a time of crisis, which could be quite possible, by the way. And there are Chinese troops all over this country. And there are Chinese troops lined up across the border in Canada, also in Mexico. They've been in Mexico for a while. It'd be very easy for them to just kind of slide right in and say, hey, we're here to help. So what would that do? Well, first of all, people would say, well, look at the Chinese. They're not so bad. They're helping us in our time of need.
Oh,
right?
Huh.
Wouldn't you want to conquer a nation like that?
I know, I'm suspicious. Oh, my God.
And then it's like, when the fuck are they going to leave? We're good now. Thank you.
No, they're not leaving.
You can go home now. So there's something intense about how those planets are lined up and staged. And as somebody who knows a little bit of astrology, you'll appreciate this. Jupiter and the Moon and Neptune are all conjunct in Pisces that day.
Oh, man. Wow, that's interesting. Wow. Talk about being led by your emotions and whatever illusions or anything that you have. Oh, my God.
So I feel like, on the one hand, people, when some of these things may happen, some of these things, and perhaps quite more, may happen, on the one hand, don't be discouraged by them. On the other hand, don't stick your head in the sand and have some kind of navel-gazing New Age kind of experience, because that's not going to help either. So it's a real fine line between paying attention and seeing what's happening and staring it down and not sort of distracting yourself away from it, and also not going into too much fear. A sense of alarm is good, right? I mean, we need that every now and then. If you don't have a sense of alarm and you're in a situation that might be, fairly dangerous, you're going to have your butt handed to you. So we need a little bit of alarm. It keeps us out of situations that are perilous to us. But you don't want to go too overboard. But at the same time, you don't want to just slough it off and say, well, it's just another thing and whatever. I won't pay attention to it. It won't pay attention back to me. Because I think that'll be the wrong attitude as well. But I feel like if that does happen, you have to be aware, you have to be engaged, and we're quote unquote in the circle at that point. I think we are in the circle, and now we have to deal with what's happening inside that circle. The other thing with this year is that the money situation is very erratic, with the South Node in Scorpio, True Node in Taurus, Uranus in Taurus. Traditional banking is teetering right now. Mexico is announcing that in 2024 they're going to have their own digital currency, right? That's only 2 years from now. 2024. If you're living in Mexico, you will not be using the paper peso, and they've already been working on this. There's this thing called a koozie. I think it's called a koozie. And they have them in Guadalajara, and they've been playing with this koozie thing. It's almost like, being able to redeem your koozie points for discounts or whatever. And how do you get koozie points? Well, it's like a social credit score. You rack them up by doing certain things. So they've been training people in Mexico to accept this. So, we're headed into a very strange time with this money thing. And so people need to be aware of that.
Nick, did you have anything you wanted to ask Robert or comment upon? Yes, Justin. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. I'm a little bit overwhelmed. Lot of information. It's a lot for me to wrap my head around. What do you think? Like, I've always been an advocate of people kind of snapping out of this idea that government has any right to rule us at all in any way. And yet here we are, I'm all grown up now, and still we're on our knees thinking that government is our boss. And so what do you think are the chances of us, this, when people have had enough? Because it definitely looks like more and more people are saying, wait a minute, no matter how much we give in, they're just demanding more and pushing further and further. What do you think are our chances of enough of us kind of snapping out of this and no longer submitting to these demons?
Well, I think it's happening. These guys down at the city council meeting or the city council, they've been getting away with this for years. For years. And now they're all of a sudden not getting away with it anymore. And these people, we're not asking them politely to not do these things. We clearly stated why it was not in the city's best interests, why it was not in the citizens of the city's best interest. We did that. And then we even served them notices. So the affidavit that we served them, 130 affidavits, that's part of the process. So I would say once they did this thing, they put this tattletale tool on the website, and it was put there by the city manager, and people were instructed that if a business wasn't complying with the COVID codes and restrictions, well, just go right on there and just type in who it was and what they were doing. Well, we did not like it, and we came out in force. It was a catalytic moment. It was kind of like that was our Boston Tea Party moment. And we came right out in force. We said, we don't like it. This is why we don't like it, and you need to take it down. You're going to turn citizen against citizen. Well, here's what they did. They're sneaky bastards. So they said, okay, we'll take it down, but we'll leave a number up. You can call. No, we got them to take the number down, and we didn't stop there. It was like, okay, these guys were, they're not on our team, and so we've been pushing back. Every single city council meeting, we show up and we bark at them, and we bark at them so much that they've changed the rules, the meeting rules, for us now, which means that we're getting to them. And now that we've delivered this affidavit process, we're not, humbly asking them to not do what they're doing because they're grossly overreaching their authority. We've delivered them with legal documents at this point, and these are notarized documents. You have 72 hours to respond. We're going to tie up their resources because their city lawyer has to go through every single one of those documents. Every single one. They, as city council people, have to go through every single document. Same with the city manager. So that's subterfuge. That's almost, fifth generational warfare, because we're now extracting resources from them that they think that they could be or should be using elsewhere, especially the city lawyer. So there's that, right? And then there's another layer after this with the affidavit that if they don't respond, then there's another series of consequences. So I think it's happening, Nick, and I think it's happening in a civil way. It's a civil, mostly polite, but it's an unapologetic response to what's taking place. And I do think that there is a potential for this to go kinetic. Like, I think it could go kinetic. And I know you're up in Canada, and some people in Canada have firearms still. There are lots of firearms here in this country. And frankly, I don't want it to go kinetic. I'm not sitting around here hoping that we get into a shootout with the blue helmets or the Chinese or the Russians or the Albanians or other Americans. I really don't want that. But there's a chance that it could happen. I mean, because the Tinder is so dry right now that people are really on edge. But I feel like tonight when we did something like we did, and we're going to continue to move forward, and if other communities do this, then it will be a release valve, a bit of a release valve, and that we can make some headway against these little petty tyrants. And I also want to put this into context in terms of something that's called the fourth turning. And we're in the fourth turning right now. And for people that know what that is, and some of you people might, because this is a really sharp group that listens to your program in Rev Radio. But there are these various turnings that take place. And we're in this fourth turning, and it's the end of a cycle that started after World War II. And that's the first turning. It's associated with the springtime. And it's also connected to this idea of the hero. It's the time of the hero. And, of course, it's post-war America, and we're heroic, and we have Audie Murphy, and we have John Wayne, and we have, all these Westerns that are being made, which is all about the good guys and the white hats. And, that lasts for a period of time. And then we move into the second turning, which is synonymous with the 1960s. And that's connected with the summertime, and that's called the Way of the Artist. So during that time, you have the birth of, guess what, the anti-hero. So you have Clint Eastwood, and you have Steve McQueen, and you have Paul Newman, all these characters that are playing heroes, but they're not really heroes. They're the anti-hero. And John Wayne hated Clint Eastwood, by the way. They're both
I know that.
They're both Geminis, too, which is interesting.
Oh.
So that's the second turning. It's also connected to this idea of the summer of love. Then we move into the third turning, which is called, I believe, the time of the nomad. And that represents the fall. And when we look at that period of time, we're into Reaganomics, the whole supply side thing. And it's really the plundering of America. It starts. It's like, that's what happens during the fall. You take in the harvest. And that's the harvest time. You have junk bonds. You have the whole thing with the savings and loan scandals, which were horrible, right? Deregulation, and then these guys going in and just ripping off these S&Ls. That happens. Greed is good. That was the theme. Gordon Gekko. There's just all kinds of plundering going on during that time. It's also this period of time where America begins to kind of lose its way. America really peaks in 1989 with the fall of the wall, right? And once the wall falls, the Cold War is over, and we're no longer sort of this America that we used to be. And that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing, right? McDonald's is in the former Soviet Union. McDonald's is in China. So this idea of America begins to give sway to globalism and to some degree multiculturalism, globalism in a really big way. And people begin to lose their way a little bit, right? They begin to lose their way in the 90s. The 90s are this period where, things are really shifting. The sands are shifting beneath people's feet during the 90s. And it's a very strange and very dark time in a lot of ways. We have Waco during the 90s. We have, the feds breaking into the uncle of Elian Gonzalez's house and snatching him and taking him back to Cuba. We have, Ruby Ridge with Randy. It's a very strange and very, very dark time. Crack becomes ubiquitous. Gangster rap really takes off. We're engaged in these wars in the Balkans. Clinton gets impeached. There's this time of and there's also kind of this millennial fever that's approaching us. And that's part of that period of time. And then we move into the fourth turning. And the fourth turning really, in my estimation, begins right after 9/11, 2001. And we start to move into the winter of America. And it starts to get very, very dark. And you have things like Abu Ghraib that takes place and Guantanamo takes place. And it's just a very difficult time in a lot of ways. Nobody's really listening to voices of sanity. All they want is bloodlust and revenge. And that leads into Obama and this strange kind of messianic period where things tend to get very, very, pardon the pun, dark. But it gets very dark during Obama. And so we're still in that fourth turning cycle, which is related to winter. And it's very dark now. We are in the winter of America. So, it also has to do with Pluto and Capricorn, which is connected to the darkest time. Capricorn, we're in Capricorn now. It's the darkest time of the year in the Northern Hemisphere. So we will have the spring in America again. It will happen again. We will have another turning. The first turning will occur. There will be a new culture that emerges out of this one. There are young heroes that are living amongst us now that don't know or understand the role that they will play in the days and the months and the years to come. But they will play a role, and there will be a resettling of a new culture. And when I'm an astrologer, so I work with a lot of different age groups. And I work with a lot of Gen Z kids, and they're amazing. The Gen Z kids I have worked with will blow your mind how advanced they are. They're really advanced. And they're open and they're cynical at the same time. Mm-hmm. They don't want anybody else to tell them what they think the truth is, but they know that the truth that's being handed to them is not the truth. And they have Pluto in Sagittarius, so they have a bit of a reverence about them. And they're very hard to manage in public schools, by the way. A lot of millennial teachers who have had to work with these kids find them very difficult. And, they'll go home and they'll complain about them and whatever. So the Gen Z kids are the ones that I think will be, in a lot of ways, the revolutionary guard. They're going to be the kids that will come through this time. And the ones right after them, these kids that they call Gen A, these Pluto and Capricorn kids, they're very special. They're very old souls. So the Gen Z kids will have the philosophical framework for the next wave of culture. And then the Gen A kids, the Pluto and Capricorn kids, they're going to be the ones that will create the framework for the new world. And they're really something. When you spend time, they started coming onto the scene around 2010. They're very interesting kids. And I feel like there's been a concerted effort to diminish their impact and power. They're a generation that has been, I feel, directly targeted with a lot of the trans agenda material. And they've also been targeted with a lot of the mask stuff. Mm-hmm. So, and there was a period right around 2010 to about 2013, right, that 3-year stretch where there was this massive T-square with Saturn in Libra, Uranus in Aries, and Pluto in Capricorn. The kids that are born during that 3-year period of time, those kids are going to be vengeful. I'm telling you that right now. They will be vengeful. They will be like Clint Eastwood in High Plains Drifter. I'm telling you. I know some of these kids. I'll tell you a little story. So I have a friend here in town, and she works with kids and is teaching them the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and they're mostly boys. And so she's working with them, and they sit around, and you know what they do? They plot how they're going to get even.
Wow.
With the people who have turned this world upside down. And they're explicit about how they're figuring this whole thing out. She hears these stories and she's like, man, these kids are surgical, right? So this is a group that when they get to a certain age, they're going to they're already realizing that. They just can't do anything about it now. But when they get to a certain age, the people who have been responsible for what's happened to their families, what's happened to their friends, they are going to pay a price for these kids. I'm telling you. Because they mean business. And Pluto and Capricorn kids are very old souls. And they don't mess around. Capricorn is not a very sentimental sign. So we have a very interesting future ahead of us. But we've got some time to get through here, and it's going to be tricky. I'm just telling you right now, it's going to be tricky, and especially the first few months of this year. Are we going to be done soon? I'm not that I want to be done, but I need to be conscious of the time. There's one other thing I want to say.
We have about 9 minutes.
All right, so I'm going to leave you guys with something that I think is interesting. Now, Mars is going to go retrograde in October, and it's going to go retrograde at 25 degrees Gemini. And it's going to be retrograde until January of the following year. And I never thought I would say this, only because I don't believe in sort of fairy tales. But that retrograde of Mars is going to be right on Donald Trump's sun. And if I had, and I'm not here to wave the Q flag or anything like that, trust me. But if I had to put money on Trump returning, I would. And it would be with that retrograde at Mars in Gemini at the end of the year. That's a very, very specific transit to Donald Trump's chart. And it would indicate a return. Like Mars is coming back to his sun, his Uranus, his true node in his chart. That's the wild card that ends 2022, which I think will be a wild year.
Wow. Can you repeat that thing about Trump again? Because that was strange, really.
Yeah, so Trump's sun, I think, is at 23 Gemini. And he's a Gemini sun with Uranus in Gemini and the true node in Gemini. They're all conjunct. So he's like a Gemini on triple steroids. He's a disruptor, right? You can see the disruptive element with the Sun-Uranus conjunction. But Mars will go retrograde in October, on the 31st of October. How about that, trick or treat. And it goes retrograde pretty much right on his Sun, Uranus, which means that this energy of action returns to Trump. It returns to him. It comes back to him. And it goes all the way into the new year, right? It goes, finally, Mars goes direct in January 13th of 2023. So that's almost, it's right around that January 6th period. It's a week after that January 6th period, which will go down in infamy in a lot of ways. So that's the wild card. That's the wild card of 2022. This Mars retrograde happening on Trump's Sun-Uranus conjunction. Not that I'm here to bang the drum for Trump. I mean, I wish he'd shut his mouth about the vaccines, honestly. But I'm an astrologer. So when I see that, it's like, hello, there's a there there.
Isn't there another candidate that has that too? Or something?
Like Uranus conjunction in Gemini?
Maybe.
I don't know. By the way, that's right around when the midterms take place too. That would be interesting.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. But who was it? I can't think of the name. God, let me think. Well, anyway. So, Robert, it's been wonderful, but before the show ends, can you kind of tell the audience what, the things you're involved with, your YouTube channel, everything, your Rumble channel, the whole thing, your website?
So I do a daily stream. It's on a website called 15 Minutes of Flame, and the of is OV, it's not OF. So 15 Minutes of Flame, and I start that at 9/11 Central Time, Monday through Thursday. On Friday, I have a show called the Friday Firecast, and it's usually there on the same website, and I interview lots of different people, which is a lot of fun to do. And then on Sunday night on YouTube, I have Sunday Night Astro Live, which happens roughly 8 o'clock Central Standard Time, and then I usually stream for about 3 hours, and I talk about stuff like this. I have a website called robertphoenix.com. So I have, if you're interested in astrology reading or studying astrology, I have a 16-hour course that's available for download. And it's a pretty good course, actually. So that's there. And then our friend Masaki, we did a crypto webinar, which is a really, really good webinar. And that's only going to be available until the end of January. And that's on my 15 Minutes of Flame site as well. So we get into some of the astrological stuff around crypto, but it's all very nuts and boltsy. So if you want to really kind of understand crypto in a layman's sense and in a 5-hour, very condensed version of that, that would be a very valuable piece of information for people to have.
Wow, this has been incredible. The music hasn't come in yet, but I think it'll kick in maybe less than a minute. But you're gonna have to come on around March again when this stuff hits these aspects. And there's the music. So thank you so much, Robert Phoenix, for coming on, and also to Nick and every listener. Have a happy New Year, you guys, because it's gonna be quite a ride. It's been Noreen Helfand, Wild at Heart Roundtable Show. See you guys this year next week. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Revolution